Hello, welcome back to another video on memory map images. And in this video, we're going to be talking about for loops with lists. So what I have here are two groups of code snippets. So here's the first group and here's the second group. And I want you to figure out what would be the output if I were to run this code. And like with the previous videos, I want you to do so without actually running the code yourself. Okay. So take a minute or two and try to figure this one out. Alright, so we have a list 1, 2, 3, 4. And for element list, you just print the element, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then over here, list 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have this integer I that goes from 0 to the length of the list. So it will do 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it will print the values at indices 0 to 3. And then over here, we have for element list. And within this for loop iteration, lm just doubles. And then similarly, we have for I in range length of list. So I is 0 to 3, list of I will double. So if we were to run this, we see that the first group, they print the same thing, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. But the second group, however, you see that they seem to do the same thing, but when we print the list, the output is different. Only one of these for loops modified the actual list, and it was the second for loop. So why is that? So let's take a look at what's actually happening in memory. So I have here the first code snippet of that for loop, and like always, we're going to draw the memory map image. So we have our call stack, and we're going to execute line by line. So first one is a list. I'm just going to draw this up here, and later you'll see why. So list, and then this one has an array, and then the values are 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then now we create our list variable, and it points to this list object. And then now when we have this for loop, we have a variable here, and that's lm, and it's saying for element list. So at each iteration, we update what lm is, right? So lm starts here in the first iteration. It points to this int of 1. And then when we do this lm times equal 2, what's actually happening is we're creating an integer with twice the value, right? Because integers are not mutable. And then we change lm so that it's no longer referencing 1, and it's now referencing 2. So when we print lm here, we get 2. However, notice what we're changing is lm, this variable lm. We're not changing anything within the list. So this is the first iteration, and then in the second iteration, we see that, okay, lm is no longer pointing to this 2. It's pointing to the next element in the list, which is at index 1, which just so happens to be this 2, and we cross this one out. And then within that iteration, we do lm times equal 2. So that's 4. So we create an int 4. And now lm no longer points to 2. It will point to 4. So you see how as we iterate through the list, lm is changing, but the list itself is not. The array remains the same. It still has 1, 2, 3, 4, but lm changes. Right. So if we continue this in the next iteration, lm will be pointing to 3. and then we cross this one out, so it's no longer pointing 4, and then we create 6, and then L no longer points to the 3, and instead points to the 6. Right, so the only thing that's changing here is the variable elem. The list does not change at all, so when we print the list, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So let's look at the second for loop. All right, so once again, we have our call stack. We have our list object, so I'm just gonna create it up here, just to give me more room. And there's an array. We have our int 1, int 2, 3, and 4. So we create our list variable and point it here. So now when we enter our for loop, we have another variable. We have I, and if you remember, range by default start is 0. So we have our int 0 and int. So I points to this 0. So now within this for loop, we have list of 0 times equal 2. So list of 0 is right here. So I'm just gonna draw it up here just to give more room. And we double it, so we create a new int with 2. And we take our red marker and cross this one out. So now at index 0, we point to 2. And then in the next iteration, I is no longer pointing to 0. We increment it, right, within the range. So I is no longer pointing to 0. Instead, we have I is now equal to 1. And then within that for loop, we say list of 1 times equal 2. So list of 1's right here. Times equal 2, we get 4. So now at index 1, we change the value to 4 and no longer points to 2. And then this gets repeated until you finish iterating through the loop, finish iterating through the list, and then afterwards, when you print it, you should get 2, 4, 6, 8. Right, so that's the difference between the second for loop and the first for loop. Right, the first for loop, we're iterating through the list using an elem variable, and we're only changing the value of that variable each time. So the original list is not affected. Whereas over here, we're directly accessing the values at each index from 0 to 3 using this variable I. And at each iteration, we update I from 0 and then 1, 2, and 3. And at each index, 0 to 3, we change the list. Alright, then yep, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.